Okay, good evening everybody who's currently on the webinar, and I want to first of all thank you for coming and making the time to join this on a Monday night. And the hope is with a synthesis of information and a little bit of practice, we might actually do some experiential exercises on this webinar, you will feel more able to have difficult conversations that involve holding boundaries. So get yourselves ready, and a couple of things that you might hear me say this a few times during the call or the talk. It's really nice if you have questions to go ahead and type them in. There should be a screen that you can type in the questions that you'd like answered, and I'm happy to to incorporate whatever it is you want to know about into the talk. So the topic tonight is mindful parenting, and so emotional regulation and boundary holding. And the idea here is I'm going to synthesize two talks, previous webinars. One that Jonathan Mitchell, one of our clinical therapists, he works with the Avatar team, primarily the adolescent boys. He gave a talk called Boundaries 101. Right, so you can actually look that talk up. It's in the archives. And then there was a talk that I gave probably 7 months ago or so on the clinical applications of mindfulness. So this is putting together those two sets of information. Something that I'm finding as we go further, along this, 7 years into this at Open Sky. What I find is we offer a lot of educational tools, theories and actual specific tools, and in the sense that we're offering a holistic or integrated way of working with families and with kids. The idea is to be able to take a few of the concepts that are presented to you and then use them simultaneously and not just be picking up one piece at a time. So this is something that needs some intentionality and some explaining. The idea is to, there's so many different particular communication skills. There are theories around what it takes to, emotionally regulate. There's the principle of validation and reflective listening. And then there's the whole area of mindfulness in terms of self-awareness and the techniques of breathing, feeling the body, regulation. All of these are meant to be used in concert and not just one at a time. And I think you'll get to see what I'm talking about as we move through the talk. So this is a summary of Jonathan's presentation. And one of his slides talks about boundaries are relational. So something that he had mentioned is that there's boundary holding like prisons, right, where it's very impersonal and aggressive and dehumanizing. And then there's trying to hold boundaries where there is actually a relationship. So these could be holding boundaries with your family members, your child, holding boundaries with your spouse, friends. Really the idea here is that when there is a personal relationship, it becomes very risky. There is an emotional charge to holding boundaries when we are personally involved with people. So it's rather inescapable, this idea that my emotions will be very, very activated at times, particularly when it comes to holding boundaries. So another thing he mentioned is that with relationship, we are looking at higher stakes. So a little bit more on this. The people who push our buttons the most are the ones that we care about the most. So the closer our relationships are, so our kids, our spouse, our family members, siblings, the people that we're really close to, when we try to hold boundaries, the stakes are really, really high. Right? We really want the relationship to work. We really want what is good for the other person, especially if they're our kid and under our care. So again, this idea that it's high stakes. So when it comes to holding this line, there's a tremendous amount of work that you can do in terms of preparing yourself emotionally, so that clear communication and the communication tools that we give you, you could actually avail yourself of that in the moment of the tough discussion, in the moment when you're trying to hold the line. So high stakes, right? And then another thing he mentioned was that when boundaries don't work, when they haven't worked in the past, one of the things that you can examine is if your boundary holding has tended to go to the extremes. So he said to explore the polarity. And the extremes are, on one side, you'll have very lenient, kind of almost like a friendship, where the boundaries are really watered down and very waffly, or kind of meaningless, right? There's that on one end, and then on the other end, there's all the way to the non-relational punishment, kind of aggressive holding boundaries. And something that I want you to look at here is, if you are moving toward these extremes, the thing that you have to look at is how much of your emotions are being stirred up because of the situation. And so something he asked people to look at is, so when I make a boundary from a place in which I'm triggered, that is, I'm taking it personally, right? It's very hard not to take your kids personally, but that's really what we're asking for. I become less effective. Okay? So when boundary holding comes from an emotionally triggered place, it's very, very tricky, and more likely than not, the boundary holding isn't going to work. So the interesting thing, though, is with a little bit of contemplation, you can start to look at, every time that you've tried to hold a boundary in the past and it's kind of blown up on you, if you look back at some of these and remember and think how you felt, like what was going on for you during that conversation, more likely than not, you're going to find that this is about your emotional patterning as well that comes into play. So another the point that I think is really important here too is what happens to me, that is you, what happens to you personally when you try to hold a boundary and then it's broken. So this is the part that I'm talking about where you're taking it personally, where the sense of being disrespected, the hurt that it seems like they don't care, all of those are real emotions that you must then work with. You have to accommodate. You have to become aware of your emotional situation. What is at play, right? First awareness. And then you can modulate your communication, your behavior. You can actually make adjustments to either what the specific boundary is or how you're delivering it. So again, it's really good to know what happens. What is your pattern when you try to hold boundaries in the past? Have you become frightened? Have you become angry? Have you felt hopeless? Right? These are all tremendously strong emotions which have a way of interfering with our thought process and our decision making. So keep that in mind. What happens to you? The next point is when we're trying to hold a boundary and we're having a lot of emotions. Now this is where I want to remind you of something that I say with some frequency during the wellness weekend and also on the Sunday night calls. A lot of the times when you're trying to hold a boundary and it's very emotional for you, probably what's going on is stuff from your own childhood, from your family of origin, your attachment style to your parents, your caregivers. So all of this stuff that happened to you in your childhood and your growing up, this is what comes into play when you're trying to hold boundaries with your kids, right? So again, this is this very charged emotional state, and there are times when you're having a power struggle or an argument with your child, and at an unconscious level, most of the time, if you're not specifically looking for it and trying to find out what's going on for you, this is going to be totally under the radar, and you will not be aware of it at all if you don't try to look, right? So it's your patterning that will come up. So another way of saying this is, raising kids basically brings up all of your own unresolved issues. And, for some of us, we might not even know exactly what that is. So here's a plug for why the family systems piece is so important, right? We encourage you to really entertain this idea that the more you work on yourself, on your own issues, your own emotional patterning, the more you do this kind of work, number one, you're going to be a happier, healthier, stronger, more resilient person. And because of that, you will automatically be a better parent. Right? So again, there's this idea of the amount of emotional work that parents must do, in order to assure or not necessarily assure, but help a favorable outcome. Right? There's stuff that you can do to support your child, and really it boils down to being able to work with your own emotions. How many times have you, had a really firm idea of what needs to happen? You make a plan, and when it comes time to delivering, the boundary or having the discussion with the people involved, you can't get your point across, or you get triggered, or you and your kid trigger each other, and the whole thing blows up, right? So there's this very important piece of emotional regulation that you have to spend some time practicing and learning, familiarizing yourself with the specific techniques of emotional regulation, which we'll get into. So, a couple more things from Jonathan. Oh no, I think that was the last thing from Jonathan. So how do we do this? So now I'm going to do a little recapitulation, pulling some stuff from the presentation that I gave. And I wanted to start with a definition of awareness, right? So awareness is the state or ability to perceive, feel, or be conscious of events, objects, or sensory patterns. Now, something I mentioned before too, this idea of conscious of events. Your thoughts are a mental event, right? And if you're not aware of what you're thinking in the actual moment, it's very, very easy to get lost or completely lose your direction if you're not aware of what you're actually thinking, and understand that your very thoughts are actually causing physiological changes in your body and your emotions. You're getting stressed out, or you're getting more paranoid, or you're getting more aggressive or more hopeless, right? What you actually think makes a big difference. Okay, so awareness is this ability to perceive. Now, here's an interesting slide. What can awareness perceive? Well, this is, if you look at the slide, this is the four areas. This is kind of the 4 lines that we talk about when we do feelings checks. So you can look at awareness as who you really are. This is who you are. This is where your life comes from, is being aware. And what can you point your awareness to? Well, you can perceive physical things, mental activity, your emotions, and your spiritual well-being, right? So the spiritual part, a lot of people don't talk about, but that is a huge component of what we do here at Open Sky. So awareness can perceive these 4 different areas. Now, what is mindfulness? It's not the same thing as awareness. Mindfulness is the actual technique and the there are a few techniques that you can practice in order to strengthen your ability to direct your awareness. Mindfulness allows you to choose things, right? So mindfulness is the skill that allows us to work with awareness. So a definition from Bishop and Friends, and you might be familiar with this. Mindfulness is non-elaborative, non-judgmental, present-centered awareness in which each thought, feeling, or sensation that arises in the attentional field is acknowledged and accepted as it is. Huge run-on sentence, and it's very dense. So we can have a look. Remember, we'll tease it out here. Non-elaborative, no storytelling, no analysis, no problem solving, no rescuing, right? Non-judgmental, it's not good or bad or variations thereof. Now this is the important part. Present-centered awareness in which each thought, feeling, or sensation that arises in the attentional field. Mindfulness is something that you have to choose to do. In the heat of the moment when you're having a very difficult conversation with your child and trying to hold the boundary, and you can see that it's not going very well for you. It's at that moment you actually have to say on purpose, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to kind of stop with my agenda of trying to, talk and make my point. I'm going to take a few moments just to look and find out what's going on. This is so huge. It's pausing. It's an intentional pause in the heat of the moment. And this allows you a lot more latitude in terms of, what's going to come out of your mouth and whether or not, you're going to pursue or continue the particular conversation. Because sometimes, really the thing to do is to just stop, right? And maybe come back later, a few minutes later, or set a time, right? So it's this ability to pause that is incredibly important when you're trying to hold a boundary and there's kind of an argument going on. So what's the specific tools? The 4-line feelings check, right? And if you remember that awareness can go out to these 4 areas. This is where you need to practice this. This is what your kids are learning, right? So in any given moment, particularly when you're in a heated conversation, you must purposefully stop and go, wow, what am I feeling in my body right now? And this is huge because when you are stressed out and when you're feeling defensive or frightened or sad, there will always be a tension, a tightening of one or maybe several parts of your body. And so unless you are able to actually be embodied in that argument or in that conversation where you're trying to hold up a boundary, if you don't learn how to slow down and feel, you're going to get swept away by your emotions. Right? So the biggest way you can slow down and anchor yourself, ground yourself, is to physically feel what part of your body becomes tight in that argument, in that discussion. And then there's this thing of a phrase, of coming to your senses. So while you're having this difficult boundary holding session, can you pause and then notice something like what's the temperature around you? What does your skin feel like? What's your breathing like? These are all coming to your senses, okay? The second one is being aware of your thoughts and cognitions. Right? This is a huge one because a lot of times what happens is we're having a conversation, and this is the part of where validation and reflective listening is so important. Most of the time, unless we're doing this on purpose, we half listen to what the other person is saying, and we are mentally preparing what our rebuttal or our next statement is going to be. And oftentimes, if what's coming toward us is a lot of resistance or aggression, our own thoughts become aggressive. And we begin thinking things like, if you have these thoughts like, you little brat, or my God, why don't you get it? Why are you so dense? Or you have thoughts of, you know, this is awful. My life is, this is just another example of why my life is so unworkable. I mean, look at this, what's happening right now. I'm having this horrible conversation or argument. Those thoughts in that moment have tremendous power. They have the ability to shut you down. They have the ability to make you more freaked out, right? So being able to pause and go, what am I thinking right now? Right? So that's a huge one. And then another of the 4-line feelings checks, the heart, the emotional piece, right? Actually knowing in that moment, okay, I am so freaked out right now, or I am so angry right now, or I am so sad right now. Hugely important information, because without this connection to what is actually happening on an emotional level, without connecting and relating to your emotional state, if you don't do that, your emotions are just going to run wild, and they are going to control just about everything that you do. Okay, they will control your facial expressions. They will control the tone of your voice. Your emotions will control what you're doing with your eyebrows, your eyes, the very words that you use, how fast or slow you talk. All of that will be influenced and actually be driven by your emotions. So, as I said before, boundary holding is incredibly emotional. Well, yeah, here it is. So what do? You pause and you feel. The thing to keep in mind is that even in a heated boundary discussion or argument, it is not a life or death situation. It simply is not life or death. Maybe you might be having a conversation about a life or death matter, like sobriety, or their drug use, right? Or their self-harming or suicidal ideations or previous behaviors. I mean, those are really scary. Those are life-threatening events. But in the moment that you're actually trying to have the conversation about boundaries, is that life-threatening? Is someone going to die? No, absolutely not. And the key here is to remember, without proper training, you are triggered. You're triggered, and if you look at a brain scan of you while you're having this boundary conversation, it would look like you're about to die, right? The front prefrontal cortex is nearly black, hardly any activity. And the only thing that's really on fire is all of the primitive brain structures, the midbrain, the limbic system, all the stuff that governs, self-preservation. Right? That's what's going on. So again, this idea to pause and just simply know, wow, right now in this conversation about this boundary, I am triggered. And as soon as you're triggered, as soon as your emotions have, been escalated, and you're having this kind of upsurge, this neurotic upheaval, we can call it, it is so key. It's so key to validate your own self, right? and connect to that. So the last one of the 4-line feelings checks is, this spiritual arena. And for those folks who have, who actually have a very personal and strong spiritual practice, remember that in those heated moments, you can pause and actually do something like ask for help from your higher power. Pause. So it's this idea of embodied awareness. This is what's going to be so key for you when you're trying to hold the boundary, right? Okay. Once again, if you have questions, you can type them in, and I'll look down periodically to check to see if anything's coming up for you. So, yeah, if any questions, please bring them forth. So, back to something that Jonathan said. When I make a boundary from a place in which I'm triggered, I become less effective. So, as you're having that heated conversation and you're triggered, if you don't realize this, it's going to be an automatic kind of just being swept along, and you'll get more and more escalated. And I think this is very familiar for people. So another thing to consider, and this is a reflection, a contemplation, a mental exercise that you can do in preparation or in anticipation of having a boundary discussion. You can take a look and ask yourself a couple of these questions that Jonathan brought up. Is, how do I break relationship when I'm holding a boundary? And let me stop here for a second. The thing to remember and to be able to validate during heated conversations is that you value the relationship. You can actually verbalize that. You can actually say, I'm having a really hard time understanding and following your line of thinking, and I'm getting very, very upset. And our relationship is so important to me. Your well-being is so important to me. This is something that you can actually verbalize, but it's also something that you can communicate non-verbally, right? Just by contemplating on how much you value the relationship. And then that way you can bring that into the conversation when it's actual go time, right? You have to remind yourself of, why it's worth it to actually be frightened, why it's worth it to have to slow down and feel yourself, because you value the relationship. Interestingly, we think of this relationship as something that goes between us and other people or our kids, but really what I also want you to look at is that you have to stay related to yourself. When you break relationship with yourself, that is when you are unaware and you're not relating to your emotions, you're not relating to your physical sensations, which, as you know, is your emotions being expressed in the body. It's like the same thing, right? Emotions or the body, they're connected. When you are disconnected from yourself, when you break that relationship with yourself, you're really, you're in very, very choppy and turbulent waters, right? So again, it's this idea of relate to yourself, relate to your emotions, relate to your physical sensations during the conversation, in the moment, right? And then another contemplation is this idea of when I've held boundaries in the past and they've been broken. What did that mean to me? Right? How did that make me feel? And realize that those emotions that you experienced when you had boundaries completely disregarded or broken, those feelings of disrespect or fear or dread of trying to hold up another boundary or a new boundary, those emotions are incredibly powerful. So just look at some things that some conversations you've had in the past, and remember what that felt like. So the thing here is to remember, if you can, what was going on in your body, or can you remember a part of you that was really tight, like what your mouth or your jaws, your chest or your throat felt like in that moment. It's probably going to happen again, right? So this idea of the relationship being valuable, the relationship with your child or the other person, whoever might be in question around the boundary, and this idea of not breaking a relationship with ourself, right? Staying connected to our own experience, right? And the more you spend time checking this stuff out when you're not triggered, right? When you're not having the conversation, you actually spend some time when you have a rational mind thinking about these things. You can set an intention of how you want to be, how you want the conversation to go. But you can actually prepare yourself for doing this. And this is where visualization, imagining the conversation and imagining what you might feel like is really, really important, because when you vividly imagine something, um, and you work through that, or you get yourself a little bit worked up by imagining or remembering a really difficult boundary holding session in the past, you can sort of trigger your emotions to come up, and then you practice the techniques that we were talking about. You practice feeling your body, you practice feeling the tension, you practice threefold breathing, and then even that technique of breathing through the sensation, right? So finding that part of the body that's tight and imagining inhaling through it. Now, there's all sorts of neurological research that shows how when we simply experience physical sensation, this is actually what builds our emotional regulation. This is what builds the ability to control our affect, the way we come off. Right? All of this is done by being connected to the body. So here's the thing. How do you actually hold the particular boundary? Now, the training that the field guides get, we use a system called positive control systems, and it's about crisis communication and de-escalation, but most of it is around how to elicit cooperation. And there's a very specific step around holding boundaries. And number one, you have to clearly state what the imminent consequences are. So if you do this, then this will happen. If you do not do this, then this will happen. Right? It's important that you make it very clear, so that when they cross the line, they can't say, "Oh, but you just, I didn't know," or "You didn't tell me," or "This is unfair because I didn't know." So clearly, a statement of imminent consequences, right? So there can be no arguing about what in fact is happening or what should be happening. Now, the second part, this is the really hard part. When they cross the line, you must verbally and then experientially enforce that consequence. This is the pivotal moment, right? So let's say I set a boundary of a curfew, 1 o'clock, and the statement of imminent consequences was, if you are late, you do not get to use the car for a week, and you are grounded the next weekend. Okay. So they come home late. What you have to do is remind them this was the consequence, and now you are grounded, and now you do not have the car. So it seems really simple, right? Just you verbally enforce it. But here's the thing. Can you verbally enforce that boundary with a tone of voice that is assertive but non-aggressive? Can you enforce that boundary? Can you say you do not have car privileges and you are grounded next week? Can you say that with a sense of calm and strength? You might have to practice. You might have to practice actually looking in a mirror and saying, you're grounded, you don't have the car. You might have to practice that. And in the moment, even when you're practicing, this is where you will practice feeling your body, noticing what gets tight in you. Even when you practice, a lot of times there's a visceral response, especially if we're anticipating a lot of pushback. Okay, so this verbally enforcing the consequence, this is what a lot of the guides that we have here, sometimes they're scared as well, right? And what I want to point out to you is that there is no way of extricating your emotions from the process of holding boundaries. It is emotional. That's the slide that Jonathan was talking about, where boundaries are relational, Well, and you could just substitute emotional in there. It's emotional for you, it's emotional for the other person. And so again, without training yourself, availing yourself of emotional regulation skills, you're probably going to lose it, in that moment. So I'm going to pause. There's a question. What if they say, I don't care what you say, I'm doing what I want, and they actually do what they want? That's a great question. Now, here's kind of the telltale moment. So you sent your kids to open sky, right? That was a huge boundary right there, right? So many things weren't working, and here they are, right? So first of all, I want to just congratulate all of you in being able to hold that line. And what it comes down to is if they say, I'm going to do what I want, that's where you say, great, you can't be in this house then. You cannot live here. I want you to just pause for a second and imagine yourself saying that. Imagine yourself saying to your kid, teenager, or young adult, great, you can do, you don't care? Well, guess what? You cannot live here, and I will not finance your life. You can go work it out on your own. So I want you to pause right now, and I want you to imagine yourself saying that to your child. Okay? So let's take a moment. I want you to remember perhaps a previous boundary holding that you tried to do, or this could be even juicier. I want you to think about a boundary that you are considering that you're going to have to enforce, something that's coming up. Okay? So visualize yourself in that moment, and then coming back at you is this, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want. Visualize yourself saying, okay, well, that's not going to work at all, and you cannot live here. I will not finance your life anymore. And of course, if they're a teenager, sending them to open sky was a big action of like, this is not going to work. Right? What does it feel like in your body to imagine that moment? Most of the time, there is a tightness in the stomach, chest, or throat area. This whole kind of front section. Okay, so feeling your body, take a moment to just connect to what that is like. What does the tightness feel like? Explore that part of your body, and this is what you will be doing in the moment when you're having that conversation. Is you will feel your body, feel the tension, breathe through it, slowing down, holding that line, that firm line. That's something that most people have incredible disdain or fear of. So it hurts. That's what Lori is saying. The body can hurt, and it feels like you're being strangulated. Absolutely. This is the key here is in those really, really tense moments, your body will be telling you exactly how afraid you are or how hurt you are. And then the important thing is before you try to keep engaging with the other person and in the situation, you must first engage yourself. You must first feel your fear and your strangulation and attend to that, right? So the actual technique would be breathing through that part of your body, taking 30 seconds. And in the conversation, you might just say, like, hey, I'm having a hard time listening to you right now. I feel like I'm going to throw up, or I feel like I'm choking, and I'm going to pause. And it's an amazing thing for you to actually role model the tools that your kids have been exposed to and are training themselves in. If you were to role model that tool of pausing, feeling your body, breathing, and then maybe even using an I feel statement in that moment, I mean, how incredibly powerful, right? Let's say you were having this conversation where, it was about the whole grounded thing, right? And they said, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want. You went through that sequence of feeling your emotional flaring up, identifying the particular area of your body that became tight, taking 30 seconds or so to imagine breathing through it, feeling it, and then you use an I feel statement like, I feel completely exhausted and scared when you say that you don't care and you're going to do what you want. Imagine I feel this way because we've run into this before in the past. This is my house. These are and your health, your well-being has a huge impact on how I feel about my life. And so in the future, I'm going to hold this boundary. And from you, what I hope is that if you can take a little bit of time and calm yourself down, you will see that this makes sense. Incredibly powerful, right? So role modeling is the fastest way of showing someone how to do something. And if you were to role model what your kids have been training with in the field, it will be, it's almost like a electric shock for them. Like, oh my God, my mom is actually using an I feel statement. She's actually pausing and using threefold breath, right? That's hugely powerful. So, again, this idea of going to watering the boundaries down or making them necessarily aggressive, right? So, again, these are your emotions in play when you go to these extremes of either watering down the boundary, and let me flesh this out a little bit. Perhaps you had a really bad experience with holding a boundary before. For example, what they said was, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want, right? And then this is where you remember what that felt like. Powerless, you felt, angry, sad, belittled. Those are all really, really difficult emotions. And so if you don't learn how to work with that emotion, if you can't have enough distress tolerance to experience feeling afraid or disrespected, if you don't have the emotional tools to actually work with that, well, the next time the boundary holding is going to come around, you'll sort of, you'll remember how that felt, and you'll be so avoidant that you'll go, wow, last time she just did what she wanted, so I don't want to go through that again. You know what, honey, you can come home at 2 instead of 1, right? And this happens because you want to avoid feeling the way you felt, right? So that's one end of it. Then on the other end, you can also remember, wow, she did exactly what she wanted to last time, and screw that, who does she think she is, I'm not going to play like that, and you throw down a really severe boundary, like you're grounded for forever, for 2 weeks, or you're going to be locked in your room, something nuts like that, right? So then that becomes unhelpful as well as going all the way to the other end of the spectrum. So again, in the middle, an assertive, meaningful boundary is achievable. You can arrive at that. You can enforce that. You can state what the boundary is, and then actually enforce that in a much more powerful and clear way when you have emotional regulation. So, yep, there it is again. Boundaries are relational, right? Why does it hurt so much? because these are the people that we love. And the ones that we love the most are the ones that we are incidentally most afraid of sometimes, and have the most sway over our emotional state. So I guess why I'm saying this again is to give yourself a break, or be a little bit more kind to yourself when your emotions just sort of overtake you. Right? And realize that you're going to have to practice at this. And there's nothing wrong with you in particular because you get so emotionally fired up. That's what happens with our close relations. Right? So if we can begin from that place, realizing that our emotions are incredibly heightened, the closer the relationship is to us, the more meaningful the relationship is for us. If we could just start from that place of accepting that, then we can begin working on techniques to actually have that resilience and that distress tolerance. But if we keep thinking, this shouldn't be happening, then there's really no progress. There's no moving forward. So starting from the place that holding boundaries is incredibly fiery, incredibly emotional, and giving yourself a shot of compassion and patience that you're going to have to train. You're going to have to work at this. And that's really, really okay. Most of the time, this kind of learning, this kind of communication isn't stuff that our parents taught us, right? We actually have to learn this. So again, the whole emotionality piece here, and we go back to the 4-line feelings check. In these, the 4 different areas of body, mind, heart, and soul, the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, keep in mind that there is a causal and interdependent relationship among these things. So, if I am incredibly fired up and I'm afraid and I'm desperate, right, that emotional state will cause my body to go through a reaction. I'll probably be releasing all sorts of stress hormones and cortisol. It's probably going to cloud my mind and my judgment. It's going to make me speedy and fast. And then just, maybe also the strong sense of fear can make me feel like I'm spiritually disconnected. And so it's this notion that what happens in one will really cause changes in the other areas. Now the good news is, if you then work with your body, for example, to feel your emotion, it will be able to that process right there will be allow you to discharge the emotion. Right? So learning how to be aware of these different areas, like learning how to pause and feel your body, learning how to pause and go, what exactly am I thinking right now? What is the specific thought? These are hugely powerful tools. And again, it's all about pausing. There's very, very little that happens in modern human life that is immediately life or death and that requires an immediate decision and an immediate action. Very, very little about modern life is like that. And so what I want you to do is consider this idea of how pausing can open situations, and how the compulsion to speed forth and get to some resolution, the resolution that I want, the compulsion to steamroll through, it actually destroys the relationship. So this era that you're trying to raise kids in, it's the hardest time I can think of. It's the hardest time in human history to try to be raising kids, holding boundaries. And so if you can really take on this idea that my emotional regulation is incredibly important for my parenting skills. My emotional regulation is incredibly important for preserving my relationships. If you can take that on, I think you'll be quite surprised at how your life will open up, how the situations will open up. This idea that being connected to yourself and your emotions in the moment, pausing, this can actually help you connect to the other person, right? So often when we're trying to hold boundaries, we lose sight of what is actually happening in the moment, how I feel, how the other person's feeling, and we're all just sort of clashing and bouncing off one another. And the ability to pause in that situation and to gather more information, checking in with my body, checking in with what I'm thinking, and then being able to say something like, we're both yelling right now. You're yelling and you're incredibly angry. I'm incredibly angry. This isn't going very well, and I want our relationship so much to survive all of this. You are important to me. The relationship is important to me. Being able to pause and say those things in the heat of the moment when you're trying to hold a boundary usually opens things up. And then I'm going to go back one more, couple steps here. The emotional regulation that you must have to actually hold the line. And the example I want to give is, oftentimes we have adult students here who might want to walk their 20 miles, leave the program. Better check the time. Wow. They want to leave the program, and so we have to, they can check themselves out anytime. But this is where we have to coach the parents of the young adults to hold a firm enough line saying, you must finish treatment, you must finish open sky, and you are not welcome home. We're not going to come get you. We're not going to pay for college. We're not going to pay for an apartment. In fact, when you leave the field, you're going to have to figure out where it is you want to go and how to get there. We're not going to give you a plane ticket. We're not going to give you a bus fare. That kind of absolute holding the line is tremendously edgy, right? So you have to, you got to practice. You got to practice working with the upsurges of your emotions so that you can actually hold that line. Okay, I'm wondering further, we've got about 7 minutes left. And I'm wondering if there are any questions. Oh, here's another one. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome, Lori. Because one of the things that we can do is just spend a couple minutes maybe doing threefold breath and actually practicing some regulation techniques in mindfulness. We could do that for a couple minutes if you want. What do you think? No questions? Okay, one more slide here. This present moment awareness allows us to purposefully choose our action and our speech. That really is the payoff right there. With awareness, we can act in accordance with our values, and we can be the person that we want to be, instead of being kind of blown around by our, unresolved emotional patterns. This is tremendous freedom, the ability to choose our action and our speech. So something that Jonathan had in his presentation was, let every boundary be fueled by the statement, I love you and I am in charge. It's really, that's a beautiful synthesis right there. If you can have that felt sense in your body, I love you and I am in charge. It'd be a really good thing, and another exercise you can do is maybe repeat these words to yourself. What does that feel like? Imagine yourself in that conversation of holding a boundary, and then you saying, I love you. I am in charge. What does that feel like in your body? You can practice just receiving that, becoming aware of that. Okay. In a nutshell, here we go. Holding boundaries is tough, emotional work. So in the moment, what do? You practice mindfulness and you become aware of what's happening. You emotionally regulate by practicing the threefold breath. And then there's that skill of interoception, feeling that part of the body that is expressing the emotion, the tightness, the pressure, the tension. Right? You practice that. And this is the key. Remember, if you practice that breathing and feeling your body, your emotion's going to move through. It will move through in 30 seconds to 3 minutes. Right? It's not that long of a time, 30 seconds to 3 minutes. And then you validate the other person. Right? So this would be, so I realize what you don't care about what happens here in this house, and you don't care about my rules. You validate that, say, and this is what's happening. Right? So it's important to validate, and I want you to keep in mind that being able to do things like validate or reflective listening or using an I feel statement, these are all very, very powerful tools, but without your emotional regulation, without your awareness, you won't even remember to use these things. Right? Do you see how important it is? You won't even remember to use it. So that's why that mindfulness piece in the practice is really important. And the fourth one, you make and verbalize what the statement of imminent consequences are, and then you hold firm to the boundary. So that's that's really the 4 steps there. I don't think we really have time to do any practice. In fact, I'm certain we don't. But if you want, look back at the presentation that I gave on the clinical applications of mindfulness, and there is a chunk of that where there's practice. There's me taking people through the protocol of mindfulness exercises, so you can avail yourself of that. And also, this is what we spend the first half hour of every Sunday night call doing. So one more thing to share. Holding boundaries in the manner you have explained has been extremely valuable for our young adults after Open Sky. It is the only way they have continued. It is the only way they have continued to grow and for us to remain sane. Yeah, right, exactly. And this webinar will stay on, so you can definitely access this at a later time and look at the slides and whatnot. So another minute or two left. Are there any other questions? Anything that you've been kind of sitting on for the last hour and would like to ask or share? Okay. So a huge thanks again for making the time to be part of this webinar. I am deeply, deeply honored to be in a position to help your family. Our team here, we understand how hard you are trying and how hard you're working. And, and your kids are out in the field, doing their work too. And every once in a while, if you can pause and just have a measure of appreciation for yourself, for all the things that you attempt, all the things that you're responsible for, and cultivate a sense of appreciation, that's going to go a long way. That's actually what helps. It's what helps you regulate. So, great. Thanks, friends. And if you keep your browser open, there's going to be a feedback, a survey that we'd like you to fill out. It would be very, very helpful. Good night, everybody. Thank you.